Welcome to In the Word, a study of the International Bible School lesson. Join Dr. Lee Magnus, Professor Emeritus of Bible, and Dr. Bill Gwaltney, Professor Emeritus of Bible, both from Milligan College, as they bring you their thoughts and knowledge of the study of the Sunday School lesson for the day. Now, here is Dr. Gwaltney.
Good morning again, friends, and welcome to In the Word. We're continuing in our study of faith in the New Testament, Christian faith, but we're going to change Gospels this morning. We're going to leave the Gospel of Mark and go to the Gospel of Luke. And so we have to be talking about Luke and the nature of this Gospel.
Right.
They tell the same story, same subject matter, but from different perspectives, don't they?
They do, and it's a wonderful thing for us that we have these four Gospels, each from a different vantage point. We get a much fuller picture of Jesus and his ministry. Luke himself appears to have been a Gentile.
Well, with a Gentile name for sure.
He does have a Gentile name,
yeah.
And Luke seems to be referred to by the Apostle Paul as one of his Gentile associates, but he's very immersed in Judaism and in the Jewish scriptures.
Right.
Now,
where do you think he came from? He was not a native of Palestine or Syria?
No, he wasn't. There are two theories about where he may have come from. One is that he was from the city of Antioch, up
of Syria?
Of Syria.
Okay.
And the reason for that theory is that he spends so much time talking about the church in Antioch and Paul's ministry in Antioch.
Yeah, and that's in the book of Acts.
Correct.
And we do recall that we have two books that seem to have been written by Luke, the Gospel and also the book of Acts.
Exactly.
And it's like two volumes.
Right. The other theory is that he came from, or at least lived for a while, in Philippi, which is in northern Greece.
Yes.
And the reason for that is that in the book of Acts, the author sometimes slips from talking third person, they went there, to talking first person. We did this, we did that.
Yeah.
Those we passages tend to begin and end at Philippi, as if he's joining the group or dropping off from the group in Philippi, which leads us to think that that was his home. And to add further support to that, there was a medical school. Philippi was a medical center. And with Luke as being a doctor, that is a possibility.
Okay, now he seems to be very interested in people who are ill, and how Jesus dealt with them, and even how Paul at times dealt with them.
And that's easily explainable from the fact that he was a medical doctor.
Okay, but there's another characteristic of him I think is very interesting. When you read the introduction to both the Gospel of Luke and to the book of Acts, you see here a person who is a historian. And he interviews people who had participated in the life of Jesus.
He tells us in the opening verses that he read everything he could get his hands on that anybody had written about Jesus.
Yes.
And he also interviewed eyewitnesses to the events in Jesus' life.
Well, it seems to me clear that he had available to him a copy of the Gospel of Mark, or at least a goodly part of it.
There's very little doubt, but that he knew Mark and had Mark's gospel to kind of build his gospel off of.
But he talked about written sources in the plural.
Yes.
So there must have been Mark plus something else, at least one other.
Other books that we don't know about. People had written down partial accounts about Jesus.
Yes.
But he also clearly talked to eyewitnesses, people who actually knew Jesus. He was not an eyewitness of Jesus himself.
And so the Gospel of Luke contains a lot of material that you don't find in the other three.
That's true. Lots of distinctive material in the birth stories and in Jesus' ministry.
Now, what is his philosophic outlook? What is he trying to say about the life of Jesus that may be different from what you find in the other Gospels?
I think the main focus is that he realized that Jesus reached out to the lowly and the lost, and of
people
all kinds.
without political power,
people without political power, people without economic status, people without
social status,
and
yes.
people without good health. You mentioned the sick earlier.
Yes.
And so Luke is very attentive to Jesus' ministry to Gentiles, to Samaritans, to...
he even puts the Samaritans in a good light.
Yes, he does. Yes.
As being receptive toward Jesus.
He's very attentive to Jesus' ministry to the poor and to outcasts, to anybody who's kind of on the fringes of society.
Yes.
He's very tenderhearted toward, and we're very grateful for the way he shows us Jesus' ministry toward those kinds of people.
The thing that is surprising to me is that he is so knowledgeable about things Jewish and things of the Old Testament.
Yes.
What do you think of that?
Well, there are two possibilities. One, that he was an ethnic Jew, that he was actually Jewish, but raised in a Gentile city, so he knew Greek very well and Greek culture.
And his Greek is excellent. Greek
is some of the best in the New Testament.
Yeah.
But it could be that he grew up as a Gentile. I think it's more likely that he is... it could be that he grew up as a Jew, is what I meant to say. I think it's more likely that he grew up as a Greek, a Gentile, but then has become interested in Judaism, as many Gentiles did.
Yes, that's not unusual.
No, not at all. And he got a copy of the Greek Old Testament,
yes.
the Septuagint, and because he's clearly familiar with the Old Testament.
And it's the Greek Old Testament.
It is, yeah.
Okay.
Our story today is a great example of the Gospel of Luke's interest in the lost and the lowly, because the two main characters, besides Jesus, are a Roman centurion, who's clearly a Gentile.
Like a rank about like a captain?
Yeah, not a high-ranking military officer, but...
not a general.
Not a general. So one is a Roman centurion, and the other is his slave, who has this low social and economic status.
And we don't know about his background. He's not given a name, and we don't know if he's Jewish or if he is non-Jewish. But the scene of the action here seems to be around Capernaum.
Right.
Now let's locate Capernaum and talk a little bit about it.
Capernaum was an important town right on the coast of the Sea of Galilee on the northwest side.
Yes.
And Jesus spent much of his public ministry in Capernaum. And
it was almost like it was one of his headquarters.
It was. And it was a perfect place because it was right on the shore. So it was easy for him to sail in boats across to the Decapolis over on the other side, or down the coast.
Down the coast, like to Tiberias.
To Tiberias or Magdala.
Or across the northern end to Bethsaida, which was a very important town as well.
Right.
And by the way, its location has recently been pretty well nailed down. It's not right next to the shore, but it lies alongside of the Jordan River coming southward before it enters into the Sea of Galilee.
So this had good lake access.
And they would go across the lake from Capernaum to Bethsaida by boat.
Okay.
And by the way, let's not forget the Sea of Galilee boat that has been found and is now preserved, and is preserved in a village near Capernaum.
Good.
And it comes from approximately the time of Jesus.
Yeah. And there are also a number of roads.
That's important. That's important.
Yeah. So it's not surprising that a centurion would have been stationed there with some Roman soldiers to try to control and guard the roads that are passing through Galilee, north and south.
So there was a road that came down from Chorazin, and there's a road that comes around from Bethsaida, and then from Capernaum, it can go further to Tiberias alongside the shore, and then head down the Jordan Valley, or it can go inland through the plain of Jezreel over to the Mediterranean. So Capernaum is on a very important road.
It is. So it's a little transportation. It was not a huge town, but it was an important transportation center.
Now, there are two important archaeological sites that exist there. One is the remains of a very large and impressive synagogue. And what is above ground is from about the 4th century. But the synagogue from the time of Jesus seems to lie beneath that synagogue, although they can't get to it very well because they'd have to tear down the ruins on top of it.
Yeah.
But then there's also a place that seems to have been a very early Christian church at the house of Peter, which seems to have been located in the town of Capernaum. So it's a very interesting place to visit.
It is.
I think our viewers ought to take a trip over.
I think they should.
We'll go with them, right?
Good, we will. And that synagogue is important for our lesson today because
Absolutely.
there's a connection with our centurion friend. Well, let me read, beginning in Luke 7 at verse 1. When Jesus had finished saying all this to the people who were listening, he entered Capernaum. There a centurion's servant, whom his master highly valued, was sick and about to die. The centurion heard of Jesus and sent some elders of the Jews to him, asking him to come and heal his servant. When they came to Jesus, they pleaded earnestly with him, "This man deserves to have you do this because he loves our nation and has built our synagogue." So Jesus went with them. He was not far from the house when the centurion sent friends to say to him, "Lord, don't trouble yourself, for I don't deserve to have you come under my roof. That's why I didn't even consider myself worthy to come to you. But say the word, and my servant will be healed. For I myself am a man under authority, with soldiers under me. I tell this one, go, and he goes, and that one, come, and he comes. I say to my servant, do this, and he does it." When Jesus heard this, he was amazed at him. And turning to the crowd following him, he said, "I tell you, I have not found such great faith even in Israel." Then the men who had been sent returned to the house and found the servant well.
All right, here is an unusual miracle.
It is. It's one of the few miracles that Jesus does at a distance.
Right.
There are just 3, and
well, you know, sometimes people in those days expected a so-called healer to come in and have a bunch of hocus-pocus kind of mumbo-jumbo and to do symbolic things, and sometimes Jesus did that. But here is another case where Jesus doesn't even seem to do anything unusual.
Right. And normally Jesus seems to have valued the personal contact with the person that he is healing.
Yes.
And we understand that, but here he has personal contact or indirect contact with the centurion, but not with the actual subject of the healing.
Apparently he never meets the centurion, at least as far as this account is concerned.
Right. Now these two people are so interesting because this is a perfect story for Luke to tell, because the centurion represents a number of things, qualities that would have been rejected by the Jews.
Off-putting, very off-putting.
Number one, he's a Roman, so he's a Gentile.
Yeah.
Number two, he's a military officer, which means he's part of the occupying, oppressive army that they hate.
And there are some who are very, very flat out ready to kill any Romans.
Oh, yeah. The zealots.
In fact, recently, just back last year, there was an attempt to destroy the church that memorializes the gift of the feeding of the 5,000 further down south alongside the Sea of Galilee by radical Jewish people. And they have been captured, and of course they are being imprisoned for the crime of destroying this place.
Yeah.
So it's not unusual for Galilee to spawn that kind of situation.
It's where the Zealot movement started.
Exactly.
In Galilee.
Exactly.
Yeah. On the other hand, the slave, who's the one who's sick here, also represents a kind of person that would have caught Luke's eye, because he's lowly in his economic status, poor. He's lowly in his social status.
Bottom of the social ladder.
And he's sick. And you'd say, well, sick doesn't necessarily make him lowly, but actually in that culture...
He's about to die, it says.
Yeah, so that is lowly. And people did have a way of looking down on sick people with a kind of suspicion that maybe they deserved their sickness.
Oh, yes.
By being unfaithful,
well,
disobedient.
In John's gospel, this was a really big issue about the man born blind.
Oh, yeah.
Because, who sinned? Because otherwise he wouldn't have been born blind.
Yeah.
Blindness is punishment for sin. Sickness is a punishment of sin. And in many kinds of sickness are attributed to demon possession.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
So,
So putting these two characters together, we
Right.
see the kind of marginalizing that would have gone on in that day, the political margin, the military connection, ethnic, economic, and even physical. These two people are marginalized. What's interesting is that not only does Jesus show respect for this centurion, but some of the Jewish religious leaders did as well.
Yeah, this is understandable, because we know that frequently non-Jewish people made contributions to the Jewish community. And whether it was just politically the right thing to do to improve relationships, or whether it was a sincere desire and appreciation for the conquered people, you can't really be sure of the motivation. But as far as these elders of the Jews are concerned, this man has shown a genuine care and concern for the people where he lived, the Jewish people.
Verse 5 is really quite striking. The elders of the Jews themselves credit him for loving their nation, that is, loving Israel.
Yes.
And also making a major financial contribution to the building of that synagogue there in Capernaum that you were talking about.
Yes.
I think we might remember Cornelius in this light from the book of Acts.
I think that's a good comparison to make, because here's Cornelius, not in Capernaum, but in Caesarea on the sea, which was the Roman capital of Palestine. And we can understand why he would be stationed there. And he is very much loved and appreciated by the Jewish people, and he cares about them. And in fact, he seems to have been on a track that might have led to becoming a proselyted Jew.
Yeah, he's actually called a God-fearer.
A God-fearer.
Which means he's made a kind of a commitment to monotheistic faith of the Jews.
Right. He's moved in that direction of becoming a proselyte.
Right. And he also was a centurion, like this man is.
Yes.
One of the things that fascinates me about this passage is that it talks about the chain of command that the centurion would have been very aware of.
Oh, yes.
He talks down in
verses 8 and 9.
Verse 8 about this chain of command. He's very aware that he's a low-ranking military officer. He's not high-ranking. So he's under authority. There are a lot of people over him who can tell him what to do, and he knows what it is to respond in obedience to them.
But he knows how to exercise authority too.
Exactly, because he is himself an officer, and so he says, and so one of the interesting things about this story is that he shows respect to Jesus as a person of authority.
He asked Jesus to come to him, but then he seems to rethink the whole thing and sends a person to speak with Jesus and tells him, now stop, don't come. I really don't feel comfortable and worthy to have you come into my house.
Right. And that shows a kind of respect toward Jesus that's quite commendable.
Again, I don't feel worthy to come into your presence.
Yeah. By the way, Luke appears to be interested in people of authority who come to faith in Jesus. Not only in the Gospel of Luke, but in the book of Acts
yes,
as well.
Exactly.
So you have the Ethiopian man who's a high-ranking government official, Cornelius, who we've been talking about,
and then the proconsul on Cyprus,
Sergius Paulus, the proconsul, and
then in Corinth even.
Yes, Gallio doesn't become a believer, but he does show Paul respect. And Simon, the Samaritan, is a person of some religious authority.
Yeah.
So that's not too surprising. But alongside of this chain of command language is a cycle of mutual respect, which I find so fascinating in this passage. Everybody respects everybody mutually.
What is strange and surprising to me is the centurion, in verse 3, the centurion heard of Jesus and sent some elders of the Jews to Jesus, asking him to come and heal his servant. And they do.
Yeah.
Now, who are these elders of the Jews? Now, this is a little bit difficult to fathom, but they are not Pharisees, they are not Herodians, they are not Sadducees. They seem to be men of authority in political terms, both in the provinces and in and around Jerusalem. So it's almost like you have a foreign power. You have the Jewish authority with Herod, the Herod family, and then you have the Sadducee group representing the priests as a political bloc, and you have Pharisees as a political bloc, but these elders of the Jews seem to be like rich Jews. We know of several rich Jewish families in and around Jerusalem, and they seem to be both wealthy but also people of political strength and clout.
Now, the Supreme Court of the Jews, called the Sanhedrin, was made up of some Pharisees, some Sadducees, and some elders. Would that be the group that we're talking about here?
Yes, that's right.
So they would have had some political and some judicial authority.
Right. Yeah, they are people with clout in society. And it might be those that would be responsible for the welfare of the Jewish community in and around Capernaum.
Okay. But how we got into this, there's kind of a mutual admiration society going on here. The centurion respects them, and they respect the centurion.
Well, they have to respect one another because they have to live together, and it would be more profitable for both sides that they do have respect for one another.
Well, then what's equally significant is that both of these groups have respect for Jesus. The centurion respects Jesus' power and authority to heal, and surprisingly, in some ways, the Jewish elders also respect Jesus enough to take this man's case to him.
This is very different from the crowd in and around Jerusalem, which the power brokers there seem not to. They respect Jesus in a way of speaking from the standpoint of here is an enemy, here is a person who would take away from our authority, a hostile person that we can't get along with. So there was more hostility to him in Jerusalem than there would be in Galilee. It seems to me.
Yeah. Well, this story is important because it shows us how Jesus reaches out to people that the typical Jew of Jesus' day would have looked down on or even hated. They hated the Roman military for their occupying.
Pharisees wouldn't deal with them because they would use agents.
Okay.
Let's say I'm a Pharisee and I want to buy a horse, and here's a Roman over here. Or a Samaritan who has a horse that I'm interested in. I wouldn't go and look at the horse. I wouldn't go and dicker with this person. I would send an agent.
Okay.
Because just by associating with such a person as that, I might become polluted and fail in my responsibility before God.
So they thought they were unclean by virtue of their Gentile.
Especially
and they were
Gentiles
hated,
and Samaritans.
Okay, and they were hated as the occupiers,
yes,
the military force. But Jesus has no problem reaching out and ministering to the needs of this centurion. The slave, on the other hand, was looked down on for different reasons. He would have been looked down on for being poor and having no social status and being sick.
Yes.
And Jesus reaches out to both of these people.
Yes.
And with a desire to heal them. So
I think it's very interesting that this slave is referred to as being very, how is it put, very precious.
Yeah.
And what does precious mean here?
It means worth a lot. It means value.
Valuable.
Valuable, yes.
And we would say dollars and cents.
Yes. And that's the phrase in verse 2, whom his master valued highly. And then the other factor, not only was he valued highly, he was, there's a certain warmth or affection here, because the word for servant down in verse 7 is the word child. And this was a term that was frequently used for servants, young servants, who were especially close to their masters.
It could be that he was born in the household.
Could well be, and has been raised in. Sometimes people even adopted their young slaves as their legal
So
heirs.
it could be like this is a surrogate father.
Could be
for the lad.
Now, as we close our lesson, we need to come back to our theme of faith. The lesson title is Amazing Faith, and what's amazing about this is that we have a Roman centurion of all people expressing a kind of faith in Jesus, which Jesus recognizes according to verse 9.
The very last verse in
I
our
have not
text,
found such faith even in all of Israel. And,
Yes.
And here, this Luke would really have resonated with this statement, because what Jesus is saying is that there is a level of faith here, a kind of faith here, a depth of faith here, that is even greater than the Jews that I have come to minister to, the lost sheep of the house of Israel.
Yes.
And the other thing that's amazing to me about this faith is that it's clearly a personal trust in Jesus, in the person of Jesus.
And that's the nature of faith.
It is.
As we find it in the New Testament.
That's the kind of faith we need as well.
Well, friends, we're out of time again, but we've enjoyed this lesson. It's a very unusual lesson about faith, and I hope that our faith comes up to the stage of the centurions. We'll continue in Luke chapter 7 next week, so come back and be with us then, and we'll see another example of faith in the ministry of Jesus. God bless you this week.
This has been In the Word, a study of the International Bible School lesson with Dr. Lee Magnus, Professor Emeritus of Bible from Milligan College, and Dr. Bill Gwaltney, Professor Emeritus of Bible of Milligan College. Join us again next week for another lesson from the International Bible School lesson text. This has been a production of the First Christian Church Television Ministries.